Calvin Cobb, and on behalf of our board, I want to welcome you to the workshop for the Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District. I want to thank all of you for being here. This is the second in our series of workshops. We're doing them in the west. This is the central part of the watershed, and we do one in the east. And so the purpose of this meeting is really to get feedback from all of you. Where our plan is, we're going to make kind of a brief presentation of, about the Cypress Creek watershed and about what our drainage improvement district is doing. Then we've got some really a questionnaire kind of a form or a comment kind of form. We'd like to ask you some specific questions if you could give us some guidance. And you may know that the state legislature set up this special purpose district in their session last year. So it was effective in, I guess, the end of June or first part of July. And the purpose of having this district is to give the people of Cypress Creek a official governmental voice in flood control. And that's why this group was set up. And Cypress Creek is different than the other watersheds. And other watersheds, there's 23 watersheds in Harris County. And many of them are associated with cities or with other people that represent them. And we never had that representation in Cypress Creek, but now we do. So that's why we were established. And what we're, of course, we'll get into a little bit about what we're trying to do. But I'd like to make introductions. Like I say, I'm Calvin Cobb. Clara Lewis is our Secretary Treasurer. Barbara Schlabman is the Director. Mark Adam, Vice President. Joe Meyer is a Director who is not with us. Then our legal counsel is Andy Johnson down at the end. And then our engineer is Alan Black with Quiddity Engineering. So this is the team. The way we had a board meeting just before this meeting to talk about the things that we're doing. So this is the group, and please, if as we're visiting here, that we're presenting here, if you got a question, please just raise your hand and we'll get to it. So don't we don't want to blaze away at you with some kind of presentation here. So if you got something you'd like to know, just let us know. The agenda, we're going to give a little bit of background information on flooding along Cypress Creek. We're going to look at the status of the project that Harris County Flood Control District is doing. We're going to look at the goal. We've kind of set a goal out in the future of what we would like to achieve. Then really have a discussion and question and answer session. Then we'd like to do a survey. Get your feedback, because that's what's really important to us here. Now, last year we had 3 town hall meetings, and the presentation and the video of those is on our website, and this is the QR code for that website. So if you just go to Cypress Creek Drainage Improvement District, you can access our website. You can find all kinds of, you can find past presentations, the town hall presentations, the video and so forth, and other links to things that we think are important about flooding on Cypress Creek. But just to start off, the Cypress Creek watershed is one of the largest watersheds in Harris County. It's about 40 miles long. On the west side, it goes from just the east part of Waller County. On the north, it runs along FM 2920 and the Grand 99, the Grand Parkway. On the south, it runs along Highway 529 and FM 1960. And then on the east, it's where Spring Creek and Cypress Creek come together, which is just east and a little bit north of Intercontinental Airport. And the important part of this is there's 500,000 people that live in that watershed. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the voice of all of you. And we think we want to use the power of that large group to have influence on flood control in Cypress Creek. This is a little bit of flooding 101 that we had in our town hall meeting, but the parameters that affect how our watershed responds are listed there. There's rainfall, how much do we get, and how long does it last? There's the topography, what's the land like, what's the size and the slope and the shape of the land, what kind of soil and vegetation do we have, you know, what are the channels like, what's Cypress Creek and Little Cypress Creek look like, how much water will they convey, and then what's the land used for, how much land cover, how impervious is it to rainfall. So those are the things that affect how Cypress Creek responds to a big storm event. And so if you look at Harris County in the topography, you know, out in the west part on this map, you know, where you've got the brown and the red, it's steeper out there. And then the further east you go, and as you get down toward Galveston Bay, it gets flatter and flatter and flatter. So that affects how the water runs off. And then there's the soil vegetation. You know, if you get out further west, you've got more cropland, you've got more land, more trees and forests and land. As you get down in toward the city, you've got less, of course. And then this one on imperviousness, you know, that's where all the concrete is, where you've got all the color. So those are things that drive flooding along Cypress Creek. Now, there's been a lot of study work done on Cypress Creek. This is 15 studies that, and somebody said, you know, over a long period of time, there's been 15 or 20 studies done on Cypress Creek. And the interesting part about these studies is as you go in time, we get a lot more information. You know, as we go 20, 30 years, you know, we never had a storm like Harvey before. Now we got a storm like Harvey, we got a lot more information. How much rain can fall and how much can go down the creek. So, but there's been a lot of study work done on Cypress Creek. And that's led to, you know, what kind of projects are currently being done along Cypress Creek. Now, if we look at Cypress Creek, I just want to highlight a couple of things here. In the upper Cypress Creek, which is the part out here, you know, by Waller, you know, Cypress Creek comes down and makes a big bend, and then it goes back to the east by where we are now. About 2/3 of the water that makes that bend goes into the Addicks Reservoir. Only about 1/3 of the water that falls out there to the west actually goes downstream into Cypress Creek. And then you have the rest of the creek. So the issue so the people that are worried about, you know, flood control in Buffalo Bayou, then the Cypress Creek overflow into Addicks is a big issue for them. And so that's why this slide is up there, because that's an important part of what you do out west. It not only affects us here in Cypress Creek, but it also affects the Addicks Reservoir and Buffalo Bayou. Little Cypress Creek has what they call the Frontier Program, and it is to build 9 stormwater retention basins along Little Cypress Creek. And those projects are identified as they have a value of about $1 billion for those 9 basins. The Cypress Creek implementation plan, the main part of Cypress Creek, it has 22 detention sites that have been selected. It has a cost of about $1 billion. And so you know, you hear a lot of conversation about, you know, the building of these detention plans, these detention basins, and it is kind of a first step in flood control along Cypress Creek. You know, part of why Harris County Flood Control has gone to identify and start to build these projects is because they were feasible. Harris County and Harris County Flood Control own much of the land. They, you know, storing storm water during a flooding event is an important important strategy that you can use. And so this was something that was feasible to do, something you could start doing pretty quickly. And we have represented our team. Alan Black was the interim director of Harris County Flood Control for a while back, and so he brings a lot of knowledge to our team about what's happening in the flood control district. Another thing that's been talked about in these studies are the tunnels. You know, there are 8 different tunnels that are currently under consideration that essentially would be 35 or 40 foot diameter tunnels that would be put underneath the creeks. They'd be 50 to 100 feet below the ground level, and they of course carry a lot of water. You know, one of the examples is the one that's being looked at for Buffalo Bayou. It will carry twice as much water as Buffalo Bayou itself will carry. So the idea is you can get the flood water, you know, out of the area sooner. Well, the one under Cypress, it actually starts up Little Cypress Creek and then comes into Lower Cypress Creek. It has a cost of about $3.6 billion. So by the arithmetic, you know, we're talking about the kind of identified projects. They're all in different, you know, there's not a tunnel project yet, but if there was one, we're talking about over $5 billion for Cypress Creek. So this is really quite a lot of money, you know, as we think about this. And if you think about, you know, the county having bond issues to rate, you know, they had a $5 billion bond issue, or a $2.5 billion bond issue. And so we're talking about $5 billion, over $5 billion for Cypress Creek. So it's clear, if we're even the projects that we know, we're gonna have to generate a lot of money over a long period of time. And clearly, this is Harris County, it's the state of Texas, it's the federal government. You know, you've gotta access that kind of money if you wanna do something that's significant. Now, the status of the current Harris County Flood Control District projects, since the 2018 bond passed, $286 million has been spent on Cypress Creek. 174 on Cypress Creek and 112 on Little Cypress Creek. And you see there's a listing of the projects. There's been, you know, preservation of the floodplain, detention basin, land acquisition, maintenance of the creeks and tributaries. And you know, if you drive around our neighborhood here and all around, you'll see that most of the tributaries have been redone. I think those, you know, like that was about $95 million worth of projects, and they've all been completed. Then detention basin engineering and construction. And historically, those of us that follow this, I know we've got people here, and Jim Robertson and the Cypress Creek Greenbelt Project, his group, his coalition has looked at this, and we would contend that there's not been enough money spent on Cypress Creek, and Cypress Creek hasn't received its fair share of the money. You know, of course, we're selfish, we always want more for our area of town. But we did some calculations. We've received 11.4% of the $2.5 billion bond, and we have about 11% of the Harris County population. So we're actually, here recently, we've done better, I think, than we have done historically. We still don't have enough money, and we still need a lot more money, but that gives you kind of a snapshot of where we are. And then, kind of the current projects, there's 3 areas where there's work. There's the Mercer Basin. Construction began in December 2023. The Westador Basin, construction begins this year. And the DC Jester, there's 4 basins there, construction begins in 2024. So we actually, Tom Ramsey, the county commissioner, and Sam Harless and Dan Crenshaw have gotten federal and state money to pour into the TC Chester and the other basins. The idea is let's start doing something sooner rather than later. And so Tom Ramsey is really trying to drive the projects to get some of these things going sooner. There's additional engineering projects. There's the Stockton Basin, the Stockton site, which is over by the park there at Eldridge and Cypress Creek. That's one of the biggest detention basins along Cypress Creek. And it's right where Little Cypress Creek and Cypress Creek come together. And that's an important project that's pretty high in the priority list of what the flood control district would like to accomplish. So that gives you a little snapshot of where we are. And again, to stress, this is a first start. This is a place to start. These are projects to get going. And if you did all of these projects, the detention basin projects that we just listed here, that would only protect about 19% of the homes, buildings that flooded in Harvey. So this is not a solution that gets everything that we would like or want or need. Now, one of the things we did once we got set up in this drainage improvement district is we said, what kind of goal, you need to have kind of a goal. What do we see as the goal? Well, we're in the process of trying to quantify that goal, but we want to remove significantly more than 19% of the structures that are in the 100-year floodplain that are going to be removed by the current plan. We're not sure, is that number 30, 40, 50%? We want to make that a pretty big number that's feasible. And, when you talk about removing structures from the 100-year floodplain, what that means is you got to lower the elevation of the 100-year flood, and you've got to shrink in the boundaries of it toward the creek. I mean, that's how you get the structures out of it. So we support the Cypress Creek Implementation Plan and the Little Cypress Creek Frontier Program. Those are projects that can make a difference for us here. We also think that increasing the conveyance capacity in the area is important. Can we get the water out of here, more water out of here faster? Tunnel conveyance and freshwater supply integration. One of the, without getting into areas that I know I don't know enough about, we don't have enough water to meet all the growth in our area, and we don't have enough fresh water in Texas, particularly out west Texas. People are talking about building a freshwater tunnel from the Mississippi River to West Texas. So having enough fresh water in our area is a real problem. And if you go drive along the Sam Houston Tollway, you see those 10-foot diameter pipes that are being installed there. That's taking fresh water out to the west part of our area. So is it possible that we could use some of this flood water as for fresh water? Could it be stored and treated? And that's got a lot of complicated moving parts that has all kinds of organizations that are concerned and worried about that. And then, of course, we support recreational facilities. Just like the parks we have in this area, like the one we have over on Eldridge and Cypress Creek. If you can do flood control, Jim's Cypress Creek Greenbelt projects, that's a real benefit to our community. So our long-term plan is to integrate three major problem solutions. Can we mitigate flooding? Can we reduce subsidence? Can we provide for water supply? Now, this is a little bit like President Kennedy said about going to the moon in 10 years. You can set a goal. Now, how do you do it? We don't know. How is it even possible that we can integrate solutions to these three problems? So we're of a mind not to say no, not to say it can't be done. Let's see if we can set a goal, and then let's see if we can get folks like you guys to supporting of that. Can we get our state legislators to support that? Can we get our U.S. representatives and congressmen to support that? So that's kind of where our long-range goals are headed. Now, if you look at flood risk and resiliency plan areas, there's only about a half a dozen things. There are not 50 things you can do. You can put in regional detention and retention of stormwater. You can improve the surface conveyance of that water. You can put tunnels in to convey water. You can integrate stormwater and water supply. You can preserve prairie vegetation. As you would all know, prairies can store up more stormwater than concrete. And so that vegetation out there makes a difference. And then recreational facilities, parks, trails, playgrounds. Those are the elements that you can have in a resiliency plan. And what we have, we are starting, I'm gonna pull out a prop here. We just worked on today, we've got a framework here for a resiliency plan, kind of a first phase. What would the Cypress plan look like? What would it entail? And so we are working on that because what we want to do is put together a piece of work like this to go to legislatures and go to others to say, here's what we're doing. Here's what we see the future being. Here's what we think will help with flooding along Cypress Creek. So if you look at back to our watershed map, in Little Cypress Creek up there at the top, we've got detention, we got surface conveyance. Upper Cypress Creek, west of 290, you've got preserving the prairie vegetation and putting in detention and retention upstream of 290. Then the Middle Cypress Creek, you've got detention basins and surface conveyance, and then Lower Cypress Creek, you've got those things plus putting in a tunnel. So those are kind of how those elements might fit in Cypress Creek. And we're already, of course, two of the big chunks of that, putting in these detention basins on Little Cypress Creek and others. Yes?
I have a question. I've seen throughout this presentation so far, you talk about surface conveyance of the water.
Uh-huh.
The flood control district has done a great job cleaning out the small creeks or the areas. But they have failed to even mention that the largest item that needs cleaning out to support surface conveyance is Cypress Creek.
Well, there's
what do you have that you can share with us that says how we're gonna take the largest watershed that we have to have and work surface conveyance on that?
Hold that for a second. You got one more?
I think that this gentleman has read my mind as well. The flood control has improved conveyance on all the tributaries,
You bet.
but they're screwing us. Everybody to the west of the I-45 bridge, all the way to 249 and beyond, the water levels are at a higher level today than during Harvey. So we're getting shafted now. The people that are good for us is Houston Public Works. And the question is, well, why are they helping us? They are dropping Lake Houston before floodwaters hit it, so that they can take on more water. But that question was given to Harris County Flood Control 5 years ago, and they said, I'm sorry, it's not a flood control lake. We have no ability to drop the level of that lake to improve your flood conditions. So just wanted to make that point.
I'm gonna get this all down to Alan Black in a minute here, but one more comment.
Yeah, I have a question. It may fall into one of these other categories, but I didn't hear very much talk about what we're doing with new development. Are we using porous concrete, or do we have any building restrictions or guidelines that will help with the drainage or help the ground absorb the water as opposed to having to have it go into the creek? Besides just the prairie, I understand the prairie conservation, which is wonderful, but there are lots of new technologies that also allow the water to go through the concrete and get into the soil without having to use drainage.
Let me try and take a cut at that, and then Alan, I want to get you to address the conveyance issue. There are current regulations about development, and in general, they say, if you develop a piece of property, you can't convey more water off of that than would have been conveyed off of it when it was undeveloped. So that's when you see people making developments that have these detention basins on the small pieces of property. So they are required to store up the water such that no more water flows off that property than it did before development.
And I want you to get through your presentation and the points, but I wanna add into that is that currently Harris County does not and has not had a post-installation maintenance or management program for privately owned detention and retention. And everybody that's here is interested in that. They claim they don't have enough inspectors, which I understand that. However, we can teach people, they have publicly said numerous times, we rely on the public to let us know. And so I worked with, prior to the change in leadership of Harris County Engineering, to get a one-page primer put together that would help. So I don't wanna, I can speak more to that in interest, but there's lots of large things that can be done, and there's also smaller things like this that can be done, because the private are filled up with silt.
Part of this plan we're talking about here is just that, to inventory all those private detention facilities, then look at the maintenance of them and understand where that is. That's a very important point. But Alan, can you address conveyance, or Alan and Mark?
Sure, there were a number of things that have been discussed, and so I'll start with conveyance. The challenge that the flood control district faces in terms of conveyance of main stem Cypress Creek is going to be nearly, if not impossible, and insurmountable permitting requirements to be able to do that. It's a very natural, stable stream, and so the permits that are required through the Corps of Engineers to maintain compliance with Section 404 of the Clean Water Act will almost certainly make it impossible to achieve. Now, that having been said, this board's mission is, like we heard earlier, to not take no for an answer. To say, look, let's actually, what would it take to do this? So there are a number of things where maybe the government will say that there are so many other things we need to invest our dollars on that will move the needle, so to speak. Well, we're here to take up the charge on the things that are harder. Like when you talk about using stormwater for reuse on drinking water, that's really, really hard. Nobody has picked up the charge on it. Well, we're gonna do what we can to kick the tires on it. So that's why they've said conveyance of main stem cypress is not on their main radars, because of how difficult and expensive the permit would be. Now, I will also add, getting to the maintenance program, the Cypress Creek maintenance program, they're on batch 5 now. And what they're doing is they're restoring those capacities to where they were in the first place, when they were originally built, back when all the neighborhoods were built. What they're doing as part of that maintenance program is restoring it to the original capacity. So that's the intent behind that. I wanted to talk about the lake. So Lake Houston, whether it has volume or not in it, is not going to have a discernible, tangible impact on water surface elevations of Cypress Creek. So Cypress Creek flows into Spring Creek before it gets into Lake Houston. It's so far down from the watershed that wouldn't have a discernible, let's just say that the lake was 10 feet lower. That's not gonna have a discernible impact on the rate that water flows through Cypress Creek. We actually did a study on Buffalo Bayou, and it translates very well to Cypress Creek, and that is, so what we did in Buffalo, is we said, what would happen if every single bridge that crosses Buffalo Bayou was raised up to where it was no longer impeding flow? And the rate that the water flowed did not increase, and that's because of the natural value, the natural state of Buffalo Bayou, and it's very, very similar in Cypress Creek. Providing additional volume downstream in Lake Houston can be there, but the water still has to get there. And given the natural channel conditions of Cypress Creek, it's not gonna move faster. The trees that are all there and all that, that's what's keeping it from flowing any faster. To make it flow faster, you then also have to mitigate any offsetting impacts so you don't transfer the risk of flooding downstream. I'll stop there.
I gotta throw down the bullshit flag.
You're welcome to do that.
From this aspect. I think Harris County Flood Control have thrown out that crap for a while. But we can't do it because the Corps of Engineers can't get the permit to blah, blah. Let's forget about the silting up of the channel itself under the I-45 bridge. You got 35% of that cross-sectional filled with rubble from demolished bridges. The northbound bridge was demolished, and that rubble was put into the creek. Now, in this past year, you had the southbound bridge demolished because it was ruined by Harvey, and it was put into the creek. So we now have a creek that has 57,000 cubic yards of rubble that shouldn't be there. That's beyond the original design conditions. And that rubble is slowing the flow down. I met with the USGS, who were measuring the flow rate on, in the 1st of May. And he was measuring the flow, and I said, well, are you measuring the velocity? He said, no, I'm measuring the flow rate. We got 6,400 cubic feet per second. He says, but I expected it should have been 8,400 cubic feet per second. I said, well, what's the cause of that? From measuring it on the east side of the I-45 bridge, I said, what's the reason for that? He said, well, we got some obstructions upstream. I said, well, could it be that the creek is narrowed under the bridge? Oh, yeah. So, his measurement was that the flow rate was 30% less than it should be because of all this constriction and rubble under the I-45 bridge. Do you think that TxDOT or Harris County Flood Control want to address it? Hell no. They have been ignoring it, and they have been spitting in the eye of all of the subdivisions to the west of I-45 bridge for the past 5 years. And it's just, it's abominable. It's absolutely abominable. During Harvey, the water level on the west side of the bridge was 6 feet higher than the east side of the bridge. I'm sure you know that. The Michael Baker study ignored it. They said, no, it was down at 97.12 feet. It was measured at 103 feet. They have a 6-foot error in their study. And I sent that information to Matt Z's before he resigned, and he ignored it. So the Michael Baker study still sits out there as, hey, everything's A-okay. There's nothing wrong with rubble under the bridge. Everything's A-okay. We need influence and something to fix this, or we're gonna flood again.
Well, and understandably, part of that restriction and flow helps the people in Kingwood, who have been extremely vocal and successful in getting help in what they're doing. So yes, we wanna understand our neighbors and work, cohesively, but that may be part of the impetus to be a little less active about removing that. But I would like to ask a question to make sure I'm understanding something you're saying. I heard you say that it's near impossible to do any excavation cleaning out of Cypress Creek Channel itself. Then I heard you say that there will be restoring to original conditions in batch 5, which is doing pretty much that.
The tributaries. So the tributaries have a lesser stream quality than the main stem of Cypress Creek. And so the maintenance projects that the flood control district are undertaking is to restore the capacity of the tributaries that flow into Cypress
So
Creek.
there's at least one section of Cypress Creek that in the last meeting that was held by this organization showed that there would be work done on Cypress Creek itself. And I will just tell you that although he's no longer there, but in 2019, Dr. Russo, who's the second in charge of the Army Corps for this region, said that those environmental issues are not as strong as everybody has made them out to be. And it's been a bit of a crutch. So admittedly, I understand it's not a cakewalk, but it's been a red herring that's been thrown out again and again and again.
The work that is being done in batch 5 on main stem is work that'll be done above what's called the ordinary high water mark. And that's why they're able to do that work. In that particular area, they have a sufficient right-of-way to be able to bench out the channel sufficiently. And then they also, because they can't transfer the risk of flooding to anyone else. They've also undertaken excavation of a stormwater detention basin right at Cypress Creek at 45 to be able to offset the impacts, because if you increase the conveyance, that would make it worse for somebody downstream. And so they have to excavate, offsetting, stormwater mitigation, as well, which they're undertaking.
So I, for one, am very interested in hearing more from this organization about what those projects are and how they're going to happen, because I think more detail would be appreciated.
And that is exactly what I proposed to the board today as part of a phase one effort. You know, at the end of the day, we'd love to pull together a huge master plan that is exactly what everybody wants in Cypress Creek, but we gotta start somewhere. And one of the key tasks is to develop a GIS-based platform that anybody can go into to look at all of these different things that have been proposed and see where we're at on each one of them. To incorporate the funding that's coming in from the general land office for projects in Cypress Creek, to show you all these different things that A, are funded, or not funded, so that way we can continue to advocate for additional funding.
So doesn't Harris County already have something similar to that? There's certainly one for
There's some.
reporting complaints in an area, so, okay. just-
This is to really give you that vision board, that dashboard on exactly what's going on. It's simply not to the level of detail that I live in Cypress Creek too, so this is why I'm involved with this group. So to give the level of information that we think that you all want to see, to be able to say, hey, look, you're doing some, it's just not enough. But to be able to start with the vision of, this is what's being done, to acknowledge that, because that's what you'll get a lot, and I get it, I was on the other side of that conversation for a long time, is to try and say, we are doing a lot, we're doing as much as we can. Give them credit for that, but then also show at the same time, the same vision, this is what also needs to be done.
Let's do Dave, and then back to, hand back to Dave.
I can appreciate the remarks earlier about how difficult it is to get authorization from the Corps of Engineers to do anything, certainly straightening the creek. I was particularly interested in the gentleman's conversation about the disposal of all the concrete rubble in the creek. I would think it would be equally difficult to get permission from the Corps of Engineers to do that. I wonder if they had got authorization for that.
I couldn't tell you one way or the other on that. I wasn't involved with that, but that's something that, you know, the board can decide whether or not to convey that, you know, hey, we met with the public, this is some of the feedback that we've received, but I wouldn't be able to comment on that just because I don't know, I'd be making it up.
Back there? Do you have a question back there? Okay.
Just one point to point out. There are plans for significant additional detention along Cypress Creek. And one of the problems we have to create that additional detention is that the areas are just not there. There's not enough acreage to put the tens of thousands of feet additional storage that's needed. And Alan pointed out that if you go in, like with these projects on Cypress Creek, to rework the channel, if you do projects there, then you have to create detention to compensate for that additional conveyance that's going downstream. So we're working with a system that has a limited amount of area for detention. But if we're using that area to increase the flow downstream, you know, you get almost a catch-22 situation that you're in. And the question is that available surface area that you have better just to create detention rather than to improve the conveyance?
Regarding available surface area, what's the status on Rabineau? Because that was supposed to be kind of the catch-all glory child to kind of help the area, and I know Rabineau residents pushed back, but is there a status that y'all can provide as to what is the status?
Norm, do you want to, are you up on it, or Jim?
That's what
Or
Jim's here.
Jim, are you up on it? Jim? Where'd Jim go? There you are.
Yeah, we're in discussion with the county about a land. And doesn't move very fast, but there is progress,
The snapshot, my understanding of the snapshot, the county bought the 27 acres where the club was. And the intent was to buy an additional 200 acres from the public utility district and then build a big detention pond there. In the conversation with the public utility district, it was really decided by the residents that they would rather have a golf course. So the discussion is.
I would say a golf course or a park.
Huh?
Golf course or a park.
Or a park. The discussion then came to taking the 27 acres that the county owned and trading that for some land that wouldn't be used for a park or golf course closer to the creek. And I think there's been an agreement to do that, and my last understanding was that the lawyers for both sides are working up the contract for that.
There's no agreement. There is no agreement. That's the discussion that's going on, but there is no agreement.
Right, not yet.
But it's been going on for 3-4 years and.
Yeah, I do think there's been a little bit more progress over the last 12 months, I'll call that, maybe
Yeah.
18 months, something like that.
Yeah, cause I mean,
And the acreage we're talking about, giving them, is about 125 acres, something like that.
Right.
So understanding that that agreement is within the with the water district in the county, doesn't this organization have a vested interest in maybe trying to help support and edge that along? And so can you ask the commissioner, okay, where, his office, where are you all on this? Since it sounds like ball's been in their court for a little while, am I overreading?
We've done some studies, depending on, you have to get into how much detention you actually can get. It gets pretty complicated, but most of this stuff's been in our, it's been open in our public meetings, zoning districts, but, the water table is a little higher than we expected, that's not good for retention, so the acreage is a little bit less, so the potential acreage is a little bit less. So, and then it gets into who has the money to do this, and that's another issue, how does it get funded, those kind of things.
No, completely understood, but when you're saying that the ball's in the county's court at this point, what is it that you're waiting on?
We feel like we provide the hydrology study for them to respond to, and that's where it resides right now. They need to come back to us so we can develop, what we call some sort of organization, like MOU, yeah, thank you, memo of understanding or not, and that's sort of what it's saying.
Well, good on you for saying we want to do our own hydrology before.
Oh, we've done it, and we did.
No, I'm like, yeah, that's important,
Well,
that's very important.
and I'm saying, it has come at some expense to our residents through our.
Understood.
It has come at some expense.
yeah, cause from a simpleton, perspective, just being a measly utility director for my area, what I fear is if the revenue, to me, that sounds like a wonderful frosting on the cake, and that if we can't get that, and we have another tax day, Memorial, Harvey, whatever, we will be an area where every business will leave. And I think that really should be the priority in what we're thinking about, because ferries will bail out. Kroger's, Willie's, the bank, YMCA, because they have flooded 3 times, and then there is no value in anybody's home when you don't have public amenities around like grocery and dry cleaning and whatever, and the 37, smoke shops that we have and the value of all of those, but, yeah, I agree with Claudette and I agree with this gentleman. I feel like the revenue, at least for Cypress Creek, for our area, I mean, I heard 27 acres and then I heard 120 or 150. That seems like where we need to put our muscle, especially if it's on the back end, that water will get there. And we can't afford to wait, because without property value, it doesn't matter how many meetings we have. I mean, it really doesn't, because I've come to almost all of these, and we talk and it's valuable and it makes us feel good, but we got the short end of the stick on the Cypress Creek thing, and we need to push whoever it is that maybe this revenue event can happen sooner than later.
we can all take shovels out there and start tomorrow.
Well, let me make a statement here. The purpose of these meetings is to get these kinds of ideas on the table. Right now, this district has zero power and zero revenue raising opportunities. So the next thing that needs to happen is, in January, we have a legislature returning, to Austin. And one of the plans for this district is to present to the legislature a plan, and not a detailed plan, but a vision to move forward. And that's what we're looking for here, because that is what will inform the legislature to give this district the power to coordinate the federal, state, county, and even some of local funds, so we can bring maximum attention and maximum funding availability from all levels of government on to Cypress Creek.
But I would ask, how do they not already know that? Why do we have to wait till January? I mean, Harvey was 18 and, so are you saying that at that January timeframe, you're gonna ask for taxing abilities?
We're going to ask for all powers that all governmental
Including
units
taxing.
have to have the ability to fund and coordinate. And we've been told many times at every stage, from congressional level, on federal, on down, that just the fact that the district is here is significant for planning purposes for this area. And then, when we get to the legislature and get additional powers, then we actually have a way to do the things that you all are all discussing.
Right, and
Which we
understood,
do
and
not
that
have
means
now.
taxing, so just as a constituent,
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of that, but I'm suggesting, you guys need to spend a little PR time on how you are feeling, what taxing rates you're thinking of, because I think that would help get people behind. But understood, the reality is that, Cindy, the agreement, because land ownership is from the water district, which really is Champion's Forest for the most part, and the landowners there, and then Harris County. So this organization can't go in and say, oh, you guys need to do that, but what you can do is use the influence you have with Commissioner Ramsey's office to say, hey, we got people coming to our meetings asking a lot of questions, and you guys got created to be a bit of a stopgap so that they didn't have to deal with a whole lot of people, and so that.
We were created because there was no entity, who would they talk to? If all we had before this organization was, how many mud districts?
150.
150, but they're concerned, the MUDs are concerned about what's within their district, not throughout the watershed. So now, we have, the fact that we have been created, and they have told us, give Cypress Creek watershed status.
We had groups that were working
There's
together,
another
but there
question
was a
in the back.
So
divisiveness
let's
that
get
was
the question
created
back here.
intentionally.
So my question is, what committee in the legislature has had the authority to fund these projects in the past? Who chairs that committee? Who is on the ballot in November, that we can remind them, like, they'll be asking us for their vote? And, I mean, literally, truly, what committee is it that is in charge of,
The
that
state
help us-
legislature does not fund these projects. The bond election, the $2.5 billion bond election, those are your county property taxes, and those dollars are doled out by Harris County Commissioners Court. Your 5 members on court are Commissioner Ramsey, who represents y'all, Commissioner Ellis, Commissioner Garcia, Commissioner
Okay, well, I
Briones,
thought I
and
heard you
Judge
say
Dahl.
that there was county, state, and federal.
Sorry, so at the state and federal level, that typically means trying to work on a project-by-project basis for federal or state appropriations to an individual project. Those usually require a local match, especially at the federal level. At the state level, Representative Harless was highly successful in one-time lump sum appropriations to help finish out the TC Jester Basin. That's Cypress Creek and TC Jester. Chester.
But was it like his committee that he was on, or was he making an appeal to
It was
another
not a
committee
committee
or-
request, that was actually his specific request to put
Okay.
included in the state budget.
Okay,
The individual representatives can make a case for projects,
okay.
and those projects then find their way into, if we're successful, find their way into the state budget.
Well, and I appreciate and commend some, Representative Carlos for being such an advocate for us, of course. I guess I'm also just concerned too that, his request for that funding could also be used as a bargaining chip by other politicians too. And I think that that's something that could be considered, as well, that it's not, that it's, he alone cannot get this written into the budget.
Barbara and I met with Commissioner Ramsey a couple of months ago, and one of the topics we had on our list was Ravenel. And he informed us that there were after the time we met, a week or two after the time that we met with him, there were meetings between the commissioner and the PUD in Ravenel to really push that forward to some conclusion. So, we know that that's on the commissioner's list, and he's working on it, we think.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, for us to do this, it would require us spending money, so we'll have to go to our residents for a vote for approval. It's not, we can't do it as a utility district ourselves. This is something we'll have to go to our residents. The deal we're working on requires some form of bonding tax. We're gonna have to pay the county something, what it comes down to.
Right.
We the utility district, so we'll have to go to our residents. We got windows we hit, we can only vote on November and May, so we got, stuff like that we gotta work through, and protocol leading up to votes and all that kind of stuff. So it's not real simple, but
Yeah.
it's
Jim?
possible.
And if you look back at the funding that we've experienced post-Harvey and things, basically, we were looking at federal funding and local county. Texas is now developing a state water plan.
Floodplain.
I'm sorry, they have a state water plan, now they're developing a state water plan.
Flood
plan. But the water plans for water supply, which they've had for decades, the flood plan is just, it's out for review now. And I guess the question I would raise, and Alan probably could answer this, but is the drainage improvement district on the radar in that plan in any way, shape, or form? In the sense that what's in that plan, which is out for review, is what they're gonna move forward for. And, is it in there, and if it's not in there, I mean, it can't be in there for specific projects, but is it in there in such a way that what you're doing is on the radar to start to raise awareness of this district, so as flood planning goes forward in the state, we've got our nose under the tent, so to speak, with that.
I want to say two things. Let me get to that in a second, but when, we met with, Tina Peterson, who is the head of Harris County Flood Control, and to pick up on Clara's comment, there was really no voice for the Cypress Creek watershed. And so we went down and met with Tina and her staff, and she said, because the state legislature created your district, you guys have status with us. And which means that we can have conversations knowing that we're representing 500,000 people that live in this water. And so I think we can have influence, and part of what we wanna do is to make sure we understand collectively what the people in our area want and what's important to them. And so that's kind of the point about that. And then, kind of the other point, the money is really the important part of all of this. How do you, collectively, how can you get enough money? And so we just voted today to add comments from our district into the state flood plan and enable it so that we can input Cypress Creek projects into that state flood plan. So we voted to do that today.
before the creation of this drainage improvement district, there was no entity for the state to work through. Cypress Creek is not a part of that state floodplain right now.
Yes, it is.
Well,
So
in-
that's why I wanted to, if I could, I apologize for interrupting for a
that's
second.
okay.
So,
You-
so the purpose of the state flood plan is to establish a bunch of projects all across the state that the state can now start funding. Now, the number's at like $40 billion, and that's still a small number. But to answer Jim's question, every component that is currently on the radar for the flood control district to do something somewhere down the road in the Cypress Creek watershed is in that plan. So the Cypress Creek implementation plan, which admittedly my company put together as part of a way to take this, let me back up. The Michael Baker plan said, this is how much detention you need in the entire watershed. And it's gonna take, I don't know how many billions of dollars. So then my company, before I went there, was hired to say, this is too big to start right now. What can we start now? And we narrowed it down and said, these are the projects where the right-of-way already exists. All that needs now is the money and the wherewithal to design it, permit it, and then go out and build it. That's $1 billion in and of itself. That component, the implementation plan, is in the state flood plan. And so what that means, the reason that's important is that the legislature this past session put a rule in place that said, all right, we're in the flood business now, we're gonna keep putting money into the flood infrastructure fund, but those dollars can only be spent on projects that are in the state flood plan. So that's the importance and why Jim was saying, we need to make sure that there are Cypress Creek projects in the state flood plan. And there are. But one of the comments that the board will consider to submit to the Water Development Board is to say, what's in there is great, but more needs to be in there. And that's the shot across the bow to everybody, including the state and the flood control district, and anybody that'll listen is like, it's great to have a good start. And that good start will keep us going for a while, provided there's money for it, but there needs to be more included in it as well. And then on top of that, that there needs to be an amendment process, because once every 5 years isn't good enough to us. Sorry, I'll go ahead.
That's very refreshing to hear, very refreshing. So I'll take back the motion flag.
Don't tell my wife that, though.
But I think there are the two areas on the lower Cypress Creek, regional detention and surface conveyance. They're not separate elements, they're really intertwined. Because on April 10th, we had a storm, and it rained 2.36 inches. And it rose lower Cypress Creek 8.8 feet with 2.36 inches. Therefore, with 5.5 inches of the same rainfall and intensity, you would be at the flood level on Cypress Creek west of I-45 bridge. 5.5 inches. Last weekend in Polk County, where I have our lake house, we got 8 inches. And months before, we got 20 inches over 6 days. So these big rainfalls are not gonna limit themselves to 5.5 inches on lower Cypress Creek. If we get a big rainfall, we're dead. Unless we clean out under that bridge. So we got surface conveyance helps, and then if you put all these regional detentions that Michael Baker said, they'll all be full with 5.5 inch rainfall.
Well, and that's why we need to have your input and your support at the legislature starting in January, where we are planning to submit a report to the legislature as to why, and supporting why this district needs to have the powers to participate meaningfully in all of the projects that we're talking about here.
Well, this is really more than an idea, you said you want ideas, but I would like to see a section on new things you can do. You know, I mentioned the concrete with the forest. It seems like we're mostly talking about detention and cleaning out the creeks, but there are more things that could be done. We could require new installations to put in natural vegetation. I mean, things that would help besides detention. And, you talked about water. Are there ideas about how to use gray water, like using champions, that's not really a new idea, but maybe new installations should be required to use gray water for their, sprinkler systems. I'm not talking about retrofitting, it's too expensive, but going forward, there are innovative ideas that could help with the new developments and not create so much water.
And there's also an
Maybe
issue-
that's some of the, those are some of the types of subjects that are in the rest of the presentation.
Right, let me,
And
I wanna
there's-
get to that in a
excuse me,
second.
There's also an issue that the county does not have ordinance writing powers, and that is, to me, very important.
That would be important.
They need to have, our county is so large, and we are larger than some of the states in population, and yet we are like no man's land, and we have no power to do anything about it. The county can't do anything about it. And I really believe that they need to be treated more like a city. We don't have to support the entire state, but I really believe that any county as large as we are should have ordinance writing powers to make things, they can
Like
enforce
that.
these things.
For the new things.
Yeah, because the city has laws, but we don't. We have nothing.
And it's not that expensive if you're putting it in.
But we've got to get the legislature to do that.
I think that's very important.
I do too.
Well, and most water districts do have ordinance creating power, it's just not something they've generally done and are comfortable with.
And they don't have they have the regulatory power, but the floodplain manager is the county. And they set the standards for drainage, which is what we're dealing with, so.
However, Wicked 110 has imposed rules and regulations for the private detention pond to get them cleaned up, or else they'll clean them up and send them a bill.
You know, I agree with you, and I have noticed that in our districts that we have in Harris County, that the private detention ponds are typically not well maintained. Recently, I was hired by a drainage district in another county. They have an entire regime of how detention ponds are designed, constructed, and maintained. And if you don't maintain it, they'll come after you. And we're coming after people right now. That, I agree with you. But we gotta get started, and we probably ought to finish the presentation that Calvin has prepared. Thank you all. Those
I
are
tripped
great
into what's in
questions.
these are, on the back of your, agenda, there is a form to provide feedback. Here's some questions we'd like, your input to. And you can scan that QR code that's on that slide, and that'll take you to the website where you can fill in something. You can find it on our website when you go home. But we'd like to know, ranking the overall flood mitigation strategies. You know, can you rank those, you know, on a 1 through 5? You know, things we've talked about. How important do you think each one of those are relative to each other? Then on a 1 to 5 ranking, how important are recreational facilities to you? What are your top priority projects? And that's the, you know, cleaning out the creek at I-45. You know, what are your biggest flood concerns? That the creek is not conveying enough flood water.
Cleaning out the rubble under the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You know.
What's the highest rank, 1 or 5?
Pardon me?
The highest rank, 1 or 5?
Priority 1 or 5, is that a priority?
One, two,
It's
five.
on the form, isn't it?
Which one is a better number?
One is the highest.
One is the highest.
Right, but on item number 2, would 5 be the highest? How important is including recreational facilities, rank 1 to 5?
I would say the highest priority is one.
Yes. Okay, and that's what y'all are gonna use for these.
This all goes to a website that compiles everybody's comments. And so if you input that, we got a big spreadsheet that piles them all up. And so that's when we go to the legislature with a report on, you know, what we've done and what our status is, this is really good info.
It is kind of surprising though, if with all the new build, whether it be again the 36 smoke shops that are, you know, erecting around my area, but that there's not a mandate for no concrete, but that they have to use permeable, substance. And
So I would just add, you know, from an engineering perspective, permeable concrete doesn't really do much good here because look what's underneath it. We live on a bunch of clay. The water doesn't get absorbed into it, and even when you do incorporate it, what little amount is, it's not a largely tangible difference. And the biggest problem again is that first little bit of rain, it'll go down through and it'll hit that clay, and it's gonna take weeks for it to actually start. You're not really moving the needle on the issue.
I need to correct something I just told you. On the website is the survey form that's in a fillable, PDF format, and the highest is 5. On the exact, I just said the highest was 1, and I had that wrong.
Highest is 5.
Highest is.
Highest is 5.
Highest is 5.
Think of it like you're giving your preference points.
Yeah.
You know, I'm giving 5 points to this and 3 points to that.
And what I would also like to ask you is, because when you write these things down on that sheet of paper, we're all volunteers, and somebody has to put all of that into this file. So if you could please put your comments online, it goes automatically into the data sheet that we can hand to our.
And I'm sorry, just wanting to try to help for clarification. As somebody who's created and done a lot of surveys, I think what you're saying is on item number 1, you want it to put it in order of what's your number 1 priority, your number 2, your number 3, number 4, and item number 2.
No,
is-
it's not in order.
No,
How
it's
important is this item? 1 to 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to, this may be a little confusing here on the back. If you'll use your QR code and look at the form that is online, it is much more clear. And the next one that we put out that's written down will match what's here.
You have a comment back here, we have a question back here.
Yeah.
Yes, the gentleman in the green shirt, I'm sorry, I didn't
Yes, sir.
catch your name.
Alan?
How about if you guys could say to us, okay, what is the most important thing we could do right now as far as these problems are concerned? What project would give us the most benefit?
Detention. Dig as many big holes as you possibly can. And I say that for a couple of reasons. A, that's what really moves the needle on the number of homes. And B, when you look at that, what we've been calling the implementation plan, in nearly every case, the right-of-way already exists. So in other words, you know, the quickest step to getting to some real flood risk mitigation is money to dig holes on property that is already owned by the county.
Good, thank you very
And
much.
just to let you know,
That's
this-
really critical and important, because we'll all have preferences on what we'd like to see done. But what is the one thing that can give us the greatest relief in the shortest period of time that we can impact?
Yep.
That's-
And the
it's interesting.
Stockton project is the largest area, and they don't have engineering studies for that yet. But that would be a very important one to.
I'm sorry, I
the
didn't hear that.
Stockton project, which is near Eldridge, close to the creek.
You know
That's a very
Cypress Park?
large, area.
Cypress Park, right at Eldridge and Cypress Creek.
Yeah.
So that is the beginning of what will ultimately be a huge, hundreds of acres, larger than Ravenel even if I'm not mistaken, stormwater detention basin. So, not too long ago, the flood control district closed on acquiring several hundred acres from Fred Stockton. That's why we call it the Stockton Trap.
Okay, so if that would be the opinion of the board and things like that, okay, because I got an email telling me about this, okay? Why don't you make a suggestion to everybody that that's what they push for? Because everybody's gonna have their own favorite balloon in the air. Okay, but what's the most effective thing that we can get done the most rapidly and get the funds for it and things like that, that will implement and will impact what's happening in Side Creek.
Janie?
Well, I'm just gonna throw water on that because I'm sick and tired of these ugly holes being dug when they wipe out all of our forestry. And if these people are gonna be digging holes, they need to have, just like in, Rice Village, if you take out a tree, you have to replace it. They need to repopulate our trees, and I don't mean these little sticks that I don't know who's doing it over here at, across from Perry's, where they took out 52 acres and dug that ugly hole. And somebody's going in and sticking these little sticks that die every summer. That's not gonna cut it.
So
There
what-
needs to be some serious repopulation of our forestry that they're tearing out.
And that's why I want ordinance writing powers for the county, because the county can do that, because they can request things like that. You know, cities can request things like that, but our county can't do it.
So the flood control district does plant anywhere between 20 and 30,000 trees a year across the county.
Like this big.
But, no, they do not they're not the ones that put the saplings in. They do have a minimum diameter trunk. This is just the flood control district. I'm not gonna speak for any of the other agencies. I don't speak for the flood control district anymore, by the way. But they also have a performance spec. For every tree that's put in, the contractor has a requirement to maintain and water that tree for a 12-month period, or 24, I can't remember. And if it dies during that period, they have to replace it.
Well, who and when are they gonna require that for these private developments that put the holes in?
So it is a private development. It is their funds, they're ones that are building homes that people buy, and so things like that could potentially be required through an ordinance. That of course means that the costs will go up, so a home will cost more in order to build it and maintain compliance. So there's always a balancing act, just as there is with flood risk mitigation projects. You know, there's always gonna be a concern about what are we taking away in order to create additional flood risk mitigation for a community. So while I was at flood control and this still happens to this day, is that in areas that, we find that are heavily wooded, they do a survey of every single tree. They assess the condition, the species, the quality of it, whether it's a valuable tree or an invaluable tree. If it's an invasive species and it's clustered in an area, that's easy to say that needs to go away. But then if they find that there's a massive 300-year-old oak and it's fortunately positioned over on the edge of the property, they'll avoid that. So they very much consider what is out there, but they also have to balance that with the need for creating flood risk mitigation for a community.
They also need to quit allowing, and the fact that we have to wait 3 years until they redo the flood maps and whatever to get these, companies that come in and wipe our forests clean and build on flood control property. Floodplain, floodplain.
So the
That needs to
Harris
stop.
County has adopted some of the most stringent development criteria in the country. So trust me, every single development that comes in is modeled, as Calvin mentioned. So they do a computer model that says how much water, the way it is today, not developed, how much water leaves this property when it rains 3 inches. And it's 200 cubic feet per second. They will then develop a model that says this is what it looks like now with concrete and how much water leaves the site now. And if it's 500 cubic feet per second, they have to mitigate that balance, that 300 cubic feet per second difference using stormwater mitigation, using detention basins, for example. That's why all developments you see now will have stormwater detention basins. That's just how that permitting process works. If they don't go through that process, they don't get a permit to build.
And a little bit different idea, but my thought is that going to the federal government and saying we have a plan on how to help flooding and create more drinkable water for the public, I would think that would be something that would sell. That's just my opinion, because I think there's so many different flooding ideas. Harris County Flood Control has, and there's so many different studies year after year, but they're not getting off the ground totally. And it seems to me if we had even more, a double-edged sword to this where we could take care of two obstacles, I would think that federal government would be even more interested.
So to that point, so I agree with you very much. So to that point about, taking surface water and making it potable, where's North Harris County Regional Water Authority in any of this? With their $4 billion bond that very quietly passed about 5 years ago.
Well, let me respond to that. We did have one of the directors of the Water Authority here at the earlier meeting, and one of the suggestions would be as this idea matures or has legs, maybe we would do some research and make a presentation to the Water Authority, because if there is a drainage, a subsidence, and a water production meeting of those three goals, then it seems to me you're gonna have multiple sources of funding that can take different parts of that.
Right, but and agreed. In the shorter term though, are we essentially, all I can think of, so please help me if there's more things I'm not thinking of. So we basically need a lot of mini reservoirs, which are otherwise called detention and retention ponds. And then we somehow funnel it through, channels to get it to the various water districts, and or the regional water authority. So again, we come into the point where we just don't have the land. So I think you made the comment, Alan, relative to, land the county has to take and use. The problem is the county doesn't have enough land and strategically placed land. That was the issue. And on just one more point, all I have that you just recently made about the most stringent restrictions. We may have stringent restrictions, but we've got lousy oversight on them. One word, Bridgeland. And the hydrology reports that came out of there were absolutely heinous. They were so wrong. So just saying.
Last comment I'll have on cleaning out under the I-45.
Is that an important issue?
Are you sure?
Because John Davis, the Wicked 110 civil engineer, he estimated that to clean it out would cost $375,000. And to improve the conveyance of Lower Cypress Creek going to Lake Houston.
So you might wanna reach out to Wicked 110 to see what the status of all that is.
The status is that.
And when was the last time you talked with them about the status of it, is what I'm getting at?
The status is that I-45 is controlled by TxDOT because it's a federal highway.
Understood.
And flood control says, we're not gonna deal with that, that's TxDOT problem. TxDOT says, well, they're supposed to clean it out, so nobody does.
We're just suggesting, and we can, the board can consider doing this, is to find out what the current status of that is, because, there have been discussions about it, that I understand over the last X number of days, months, weeks, years, whatever. It might be worth getting an update on that, is all I'm gonna say.
The status is that each time we bring up a subject to Harris County Flood Control, they point at TxDOT. You go to TxDOT, they point at Harris County Flood Control. Now we're pointing at Wicked 110. Nothing happens.
I'm not talking about pointing any fingers, just to raise the question has there been any movement on this, so.
That's an excellent question. Has there been any movement in Harris County Commissioner's Court? And we had a meeting with Commissioner Ramsey here.
Let me
This is
cut this
excellent.
off. We're running out of time, and we have
Understand.
one lady that has not said a word.
My mind's swarming with all this. I am very interested in the detention ponds. I go by and I see an ugly hole in the ground. I'm a plant person, a wildlife person, a bird, butterfly, all that stuff. When you're talking about these retention ponds, is there anything about native planting? Is that your bailiwick?
We advocate that when detention ponds are built, that they're an amenity, they're a lake, they're wetlands. We don't support mowed detention ponds. We support forested detention ponds.
Right.
Rather than dry bottom. I mean, that's what we're advocating.
So there's a double-edged sword on a wet bottom basin. So one of the benefits out of a wet bottom basin is the bottom of it's flat, meaning all that volume above the water, you get a little bit more. Because if it's a dry bottom and it needs to drain dry, there's a slope, right? So you lose a little bit of volume there. The other side of that coin, however, is that there's a magic number of depth of water in order to, A, make sure it's not a mosquito breeding ground, and B, doesn't experience seasonal changeover, right? Where you get everything on the bottom, start to flip up, it's about 6 feet. Unfortunately, that 6 feet of water doesn't provide any detention. It's additional cost to build a basin, but it doesn't actually increase the detention volume because that water is always there. And so that's the balance that has to be struck on cost of a basin versus wet bottom and dry bottom. And you know, it's not a one size fits all, but all those things have to be considered for each individual project. Now, what they do, however, is when it does go to a wet bottom basin, you know, I've seen the flood control district do that, and I'm working on a little pilot pet project in my neighborhood with an earmark grant through the EPA that would create stormwater quality while doing flood risk mitigation. And so imagine that, you know, funding a flood risk mitigation project through the EPA, because not only are you doing a wet bottom basin and increasing the volume, but also including those aquatic plantings, some sedimentation pools so the sediment drops out, ripples that go. The flood control district considers these elements on every single detention basin that gets built. When you see an older basin that's dry, that's always runs dry, that's because it was built a long time ago. They are changing with the times and incorporating these elements where they can.
And so Alan, what did, and I know you guys need to move on, but what did happen with the ones that were being done over by Holderith? There were test things that were being done, or cables oversight that were being done with flood control to test various different types of basins.
Talking about Holderith at 249?
Yeah, but there were a number of different types of basins that were mini versions that were being tested.
What they were doing is they were testing different soil amenities or soil amendments to try and help improve the amount of water that seeped into the ground.
Okay.
Somebody was said, what are simple things that you could do? You know, and one of the, when we met with Commissioner Ramsey, he has a project that he's starting to work on, and it's in Cypress Park, to install pipelines and gates that are solar powered gates. So in advance of the storm, they would lower the lake level from 10 feet down to 5 feet and provide that additional storage for a storm event. So he's talking about, now not all of the detention basins can you gravity flow out the water, so he's talking about maybe some of them you'd have to pump out. But if you could recover on the wet bottom basin, if you could recover several feet in each of those of additional storage, that can make a big difference. You know, you think about 5 feet deep and then 50-acre lake is a fair amount of water.
Commissioner Ramsey has 2 projects that have been bid, and they are funded, and they're going to construction. The first one is that Cypress Park Basin. You know, that Cypress Park Basin at Eldridge, it's a wet bottom. There's about 15, 20 feet of water in there. And that top of water is actually perched well above Cypress Creek, so there's some room. So the project that's gonna go in there very soon, the construction should start here in the next month or two, will put a gate and a pipe that will allow that water to be drained down temporarily for a period of time for a big event. And the idea is that it provides a little bit of extra volume, and then when the rains hit and the flood comes in, that the water fills it back up to that elevation.
And that's excellent to hear. That was being discussed in 2019, and Harris County Flood Control at the time said, we don't like having mechanical things around because there are things that can break and we can't.
I'm the one that probably said that.
And so at the end of the day, there's also something called hydraulics that can help to work in ways that can be done to help it move out. And so 5 years later.
It's also an issue of
hopefully,
maintenance
just want to be
and things like
positive
that.
and hoping it'll move more quickly.
And as long as you have people willing to maintain it, then there you go.
Our subdivision has an 18-acre lake in the floodplain, and right now, every time the creek rises, our lake fills up. So if flood control were to put in a 4-foot diameter check valve in our outflow, there would be immediately 125 acre-feet of detention available for the community. But that would cost, and it would be a mechanical device, and be something the flood control think that, putting a check valve
So-
in a lake is a good thing?
The value, where money would be better spent to provide some meaningful additional flood risk mitigation would be to instead consider preemptively drawing down that permanent water. Adding a check valve to prohibit Cypress Creek from backing up into that, you won't have a tangible benefit because where the flooding happens is the 100-year event. And at the 100-year event, that basin is gonna be full anyway.
Now, our lake fills up before it hits the flood level.
But it fills up, but do homes flood?
No.
There you go, so it worked.
So the flood, our pond
Huh?
is pulling in water before the creek gets to flood level. So it's being filled up, and when it gets to flood level, there's nowhere else that it can use our pond for detention.
I think you
So-
would find that from a timing perspective, that is not, what you suggested would not have a tangible benefit. I can't get into the big conversation here, but I'm just saying, I think you will find that, ask any engineer and they'll say that would not create a tangible benefit.
Okay,
There's one lady right there.
thank all of you for being here, and I wanna ask one thing, give you a little homework here. If you haven't done it, either scan the QR code that's up there, go to the website and get into the feedback form, and please give us your feedback so we can compile all of that. It's very important, and we appreciate having a good crowd this evening. Thank all of you for coming out to visit, and we will do more of these.
If you don't do the digital things, turn in your forms that you filled out tonight. If you can do this, online, it will make so much easier the task of compiling all of that information.
And the
for your
QR code
voice
is,
to be heard.
on your agenda.
The blue one is the one that goes directly to the form.
Thank you all.
Maybe a follow-up.